everyone, and thank you for joining us on this next edition of Crusader Conversation. I'm your host, Ricky Cody, and today I'm joined by Liz Wuerffel, who is the co-director of the Welcome Project and also the assistant professor of art here at Valpo. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're all talking about diversity, inclusion, and what it means for students here at Valparaiso University. A project that has, for those of you who have been on campus for the past 4 years, know or may have heard of the Welcome Project, but it's a project that's gone on for, you were telling me, over 5 years you've been working on this. For those who do not know, describe the Welcome Project for us.
Sure. The Welcome Project is a story collection. We pair stories from students, faculty, staff, community members with a facilitation method from the Center on Civic Reflection, which Elizabeth Lynn developed. And we use the stories in conversations, in workshops, in classes to talk about issues of inclusion and belonging.
Do these students are also past students, right? You've had some of these projects that have, for students who've already graduated, and also students who are currently enrolled at the university.
Yes, so we have, our first story was 5 years ago, and it was about one Chinese student interviewed 5 of her friends who were also Chinese students. So that was our initial story. And since then we've interviewed we've interviewed more than 200 people on campus and in the community, and we keep interviewing. I have an interview later today. Yeah.
So what does these students who participate in this project, what do you find is to be the emotion that they feel and really what they're thinking, their thought processes when they get interviewed? So
we don't just interview students, but we do, that is the primary bulk of our stories. Right. And you know, I think that everyone has a story to share. Yeah. Whether or not they know it is another thing. And that's actually been a learning curve for us too, is those of us who are working on the project, which has included more than 100 students and about 20 to 30 faculty who have been involved in it. We go in with certain assumptions too. So we think, oh, we should interview so-and-so because they'll have a really good story. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that their story isn't actually about the thing we think it's going to be about. It's about something entirely different.
Do you see also the reverse on that you interview people who you think, okay, well, I mean, you mentioned, and the idea behind Crusader Conversation is that everyone has a story, so it's kind of fitting that we're talking about it. But do you also find that students who maybe are shy, a little bit more to themselves, actually turn out to have absolutely amazing and beautiful stories?
They do. They do.
And the project itself, is this interviews, obviously. Is there a place that, like, for what you've already filmed for students to actually go and watch? So
about 2 years ago, we launched our website, which is welcomeproject.valpo.edu, and you can find about just over 100 stories on the website there. Probably 2/3 are audio stories, and then about 1/3 are video. And when we interview people, we offer either video or audio, depending on what they're comfortable with. Right. Some people prefer to remain more anonymous, so audio is the way to go. And some people are just more comfortable not having a camera on them.
Right. Well, in the TV industry, that's definitely understand with interviews as well. The idea for understanding diversity, it is a huge importance here on campus. It's something that later in the show we'll actually be talking with Provost Powell, or Assistant to the Provost Powell, who will be talking more about the inclusion side of it. But it's a big issue here on campus, and not necessarily a bad issue. It's just the university's take on really including everyone. Do you think that this helped, or did it?
The Welcome Project? Yeah, so actually the origin of the Welcome Project was about 5 years ago. I had been sent to Beijing to teach there for 3 semesters in a row. Wow. Teach Chinese students who would come to Beijing and then come and matriculate into our undergraduate or graduate programs here. And one day, so when I was back here, one of those Chinese students came up to me and said, hey, I just wanted to tell you about a story that happened to me the other night. I was walking down the street late at night, and a car drove up, and 2 guys shouted, "Stupid Chinese," and drove off. You know, I was scared. It was late at night. In the United States, you can own guns. I didn't know what was going to happen. And that same week, I was teaching the freshman core program, and one of the informal writings that came in from an American student was about living in the international dorm, she dubbed it, and going down and to do her laundry in the basement and having to deal with those Asians and their greasy, noodly, messy food. So it was really interesting because, of course, I felt deep empathy with the Chinese student, but I also understood that the American student was undergoing a kind of culture change or culture shock. She might not have ever encountered a culture that was different than hers until she came to Valparaiso University. So I think that Valparaiso University has a lot to offer our students in terms of how we've diversified our student body in the last 10, 15 years.
Right, and so we've come a long way in terms of, I mean, I couldn't only imagine what exactly she was going through, but the idea was talking about diversity in the past, and also the projects that we have, the Welcome Project, as well as for the Bias Incident Hotline that was established this semester on campus. So we're going to talk more about that. We're going to be talking with Liz later on in the show. Coming up after the break, though, we're going to be speaking with Assistant to the Provost Professor Phillip Powell, who'll be talking about his new role as well as what students are doing here on campus to make sure that everyone is included here at Valparaiso University. You're watching Crusader Conversation right here on Channel 82. For over 100 years, VU has trusted the torch for reliable and accurate accounts of campus happenings. And with an end of a century, we would like to say thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Valpo.
We have been covering stories that will impact you both in print and online. For Players Spotlight and next week events, to the opinions you have, count on us as Valpo's most reliable source for campus happenings. 4-time winner of College Weekly of the Year, The Torch, home of the truth, celebrating 100 years of excellence in journalism.
Good morning, Valparaiso University. What's a better way to start your day than with a new jam? And WVUR has just what you need.
But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it... If Daniel won't change your mind, baby, right.
Broadcasting sports, news, weather, and music, on air, online, and on campus. WVUR is my jam.
With herself,
my role here is being the chair of the Diversity Facilitation Committee, which is a group of people very much involved in organizing, coordinating, and facilitating the sessions that are happening. This committee came out of a diversity summit that happened in 2012, called by President Heckler, and we have been charged with exactly that: mentor or educate future facilitators to deliver sessions all across campus for faculty, students, and staff. I'm always more interested in saying the inclusion of our own diversity. The goal is not diversity. Because when we have diversity already here among us, what do we do with them? If we don't have enough diverse faculty body or staff body, even if we get enough diverse student body, they will not stay because they will not have enough models to look up to.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. You just saw a clip from Associate Professor of Foreign Languages, Carlos Miguel-Pueyo, who were talking about the diversity inclusion sessions and his thoughts and opinions on that. And talking more about diversity and inclusion and his new role here on campus is Phillip Powell, who is the Assistant Provost, let me get this right, Assistant Provost for Specialty of Inclusion.
It's a Special Assistant to the Provost for Inclusion.
Just a mouthful. Just give you a bunch of, give you an acronym, call it a day. Thank you so much for joining us today. We were talking with Liz prior to the break about the Welcome Project, understanding the university's role in including students here on campus and sharing student stories. But we also have a new program set up here on campus, which many students may have seen the flyers both in the residence halls and around campus, of the Bias Hotline. First off, we'll talk about that in a second, but give us a little bit of background on your new role here on campus.
Okay. In May, I was appointed to the role of Special Assistant to the Provost for Inclusion. That stemmed out of our former Associate Provost, Renu Juneja, and she went to go back to teaching, so to speak, and sort of go into her new role. So they were looking for someone to take over the position full-time in special assistant to the provost is what it's called, but it'll transition into a role that's called chief diversity officer.
Okay.
So in other words, someone to, I would say, start the process of looking at diversity and inclusion in the university and try to make some improvements in that area and latch on to some of the things that have been done when concerning diversity and inclusion.
Is this a new role? I mean, you said that there was somebody who was already in this position prior. Is this a new role in terms of what you're doing? Let me give you an example. Did something come up where they're like, the university was like, we need to have somebody in a full-time position with your responsibilities?
Well, if you look at the structure of many universities, they have what's called a chief diversity officer. And the chief diversity officers might reside in an area of the multicultural programs, or it may be a standalone position and have staff, full-time staff working with them. The purpose of a chief diversity officer is to have an opportunity to have someone that could facilitate diversity initiatives on campus. So what was happening was Renu was in the position in her associate provost role, but that was just part of her responsibility. So she ended up, when she went back to teaching, the university administration looked at it and said, maybe there needs to be someone here full-time in a diversity position besides the Office of Multicultural Programs. So that's how the position was developed. And there are a few things attached to the position that we want to accomplish. So it's a good thing that they decided to put this position in and move forward in looking at diversity and inclusion on the campus.
I mentioned prior to when we first came back from commercial break, the bias hotline. What is the goal for having that plan kind of in place?
Well, if you, to become familiar with it, there has been a few incidents on campus in which normally what you do is you report to VUPD, and that's good. But what's happening is when these incidents come up, there wasn't a system in place to approach it. In other words, if VUPD had it, then what do you do with it?
Right.
So it was more of a situation where they thought, let's put together a hotline in which students could call. As a matter of fact, anyone could call and report these incidents. And then it'll go through a series of people taking the information and looking at how to approach getting additional information and going forth to solve the problems. And this would be anywhere from someone reporting an incident, racial harassment, obviously, and then there's the other part of like sexual harassment. But when you report it to the bias incident hotline, if it's a sexual harassment issue, it'll automatically go to VUPD and then go into other channels. But the bias incidents hotline is set up so that we can investigate occurrences around campus that normally you can't really do anything about unless you know about.
Right.
So this is a place someone can call.
And it's completely anonymous.
It's completely anonymous. And the thing about it is we're trying to encourage students and everyone to call it and basically just utilize it. The problem is if they call and they do not leave their name, then we have to try to figure out how to follow up and utilize the hotline and get something done about the incident. So I would encourage people to use it and leave their name so then we'll have a contact information on someone to follow up and be able to investigate a little bit further. So everyone who uses it shouldn't be afraid to call and use their name.
That's awesome. You made it reference to a couple of incidences, and for those of you who have been on campus, you may have actually seen some of these in the paper, even here on VUTV, of some of these incidences. Is this becoming more of an issue, or do you think that now, because we have the Bias Incident Hotline, we have the Welcome Project, we have different resources for students to go, that those incidences here on campus have begun to diminish, or is the threat for not being included still a problem here on campus?
It's always going to happen. No matter what institution you're in, you're going to have incidents. But that has caused us to actually look at the number of incidents that happen. Yeah. So what it's doing is helping us to compile a database and find out what's happening, where it's happening, and how many times it's occurring, so we'll be able to analyze the information and look at what to do about it or how to approach doing this, particularly tying it into the Valparaiso community and tying in officials like the mayor and police chief, things like that, so we all can work together and figure out how to make this a more inclusive campus.
And I think that is awesome, because I mean, from what I've and being a student, we've seen these incidences happening, but also know that there has been some improvement. People are becoming more aware of the Welcome Project. People are becoming more aware of the hotline, and with those plans and those programs in place, I'm sure that eventually we'll live, ideally, at a campus where everyone can be free to be who they want to be and to be themselves. So we're going to talk more about where the university plans to be in the next 5 to 10 years, coming up right after the break. You're watching Crusader Conversation on Channel 82.
On a campus plagued with terrible weather, Valpo students suffer from boredom with no motivation to leave their room. They begin to search for free movies and stumble upon Valpo's new free movie streaming website, where you get unlimited free access to recent movies like Despicable Me 2 and Jobs at the tips of your fingers. So if you're feeling bored, then don't wait. Grab some friends, find a seat, and enjoy a movie on movies.valpo.edu.
Interested in the television industry? Stop by our office in Schnabel Hall and join VUTV today.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crusader Conversation. On our final segment, I'm joined with Professor Powell and Liz Wuerffel, who are both professors in obviously Professor Powell's new role we just talked about before the break. Talking about now the future of diversity and where we're heading here at a university level over the next 5, 10, short-term, long-term, put it in framework however you'd like. But combined with your guys' experience in being here on campus, what did you guys see 10, 15 years, 20 years ago that's different now, both good and bad, if that's the case?
I guess I have to speak first since I've been here longer. One of the things that has not really changed is the number of faculty members of color. We need to increase that. So we're looking at a plan or looking at a way in which we can recruit more faculty of color. And that would definitely increase the number of minority students. It's one thing to be in class and be taught in class, but it's another thing to be in class, be taught in class by someone who looks like you. So that's something that we need to work on. It's not really a negative thing, but it's something that should be looked at in the next couple years.
And we have, and you're suggesting that we have more faculty members now, like that are faculty members of color than there were in the past? Or
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not. It hasn't changed that much. So it went up and down, and at this time, 2014, it just needs to be a little more increase.
See, it's so weird to think about because, I mean, I know we're not necessarily like a suburb of Chicago, but many students do come from, suburbs in Chicago to here. To me, that's just weird. It's definitely a different perspective to think about, is that that does make a difference. It's one thing to be taught, as you were mentioning, but also to be engaged with your professor is different. And that's one thing I know the university prides itself on, is that family atmosphere in the classroom, outside the classroom. Even here in the comm department, all the professors have their doors open. It's walk in, walk out kind of thing. And I'm sure a similar kind of setup is in the VUCA. What about you, Liz? What have you seen either change differently or something that's positive that's different?
Well, I think a lot has changed, and some things have remained the same. So I think the things that are quicker to change, the student body itself, we're over 30% international and domestic minority students, which has been a significant increase in the last 5 years even. But like Professor Powell said, our faculty and staff diversity is not the same. And I think that shows a kind of institutional and structural not resistance, but it takes longer to get that kind of change happening. And so it's about hiring practices. It's also about retention practices, not just for students, but also faculty and staff.
So either in, I don't know if you've had any past work experiences at other universities, but even in your undergrad years and graduate school years, what was that ratio like at those schools? Is it different than here at Valpo, like in terms of the international and you know just the diversity of the student body itself? How was that?
Well, I went to a public institution, the Northern Illinois University. They had to put that in. I went to a public institution, and basically that was like 45 miles from Chicago, 60 miles or so from Chicago, and you know, you attract a student body that was diverse. And so it never really bothered me then, but to come to an institution and you look around, you're saying, okay, this is a little bit different. You know, you have to be ready for it, embrace it, and that's the only way to approach it. Otherwise, you know, you always be complaining.
Right.
And to do something about it means to be able to engage in conversations and say, you know, this is something that exists. Maybe we can look at this way to change it. And, you know, when everyone starts to look at it in the same way, that's when we can create a cultural change.
What about your guys' take on the actual thought process and the understanding of the student body? Let's give you an example. This is obviously a huge topic that is not what we'll talk about in the show. But I remember reading, if you guys are familiar with the Facebook group, the Valparaiso University Confessions, and how many derogatory, inappropriate comments were made. Professor Powell and I actually had a long discussion about one of the comments for a student who was looking for the Black Student Organization when they were meeting. It's 2014. Why are we? I mean, I think that is a change that I'm like. That's why we have experts here. What are your thoughts on just the mentality of the student body? Yeah, that's probably.
I think the Welcome Project is one way to bring these things in the open. So, how would you say that that's helping us?
Yeah, well, so I do think that there has been change, but it isn't always in a good way. So what was overt racism or sexism or homophobia 20 years ago is now not overt. It's hidden in these other ways that are more anonymous, more subtle. We call them microaggressions. So they're also harder then to tackle, because you can't just say, you know, that action that you just did is blatantly racist. It's contextual. So trying to figure out, well, how is it impacting me? How is it impacting the community around us?
Right.
And the Welcome Project stories, some of them are negative, some of them are positive, a lot of them are mixed, but they get at the heart of some of those microaggressions.
It's fascinating to me in the sense of just the psychological aspect of what students are actually thinking and going through, which I know is a whole other topic outside of diversity. Liz, what are your goals for the Welcome Project over the next 5 to 10 years, again, short-term or long-term?
Yeah, you know,
you said that you were completely surprised with how it's been now, so I'm interested in hearing.
I know, we envisioned it as a 5-year project to match the strategic plan, the growth of the university and the diversification of the university student body. We haven't reached our growth of, we want to grow to 6,000 students. We haven't reached that yet, so the Welcome Project is also continuing. But I think we really quickly saw how stories become so important for having these kind of conversations, because it allows for empathy in the listener to connect with someone, to kind of get into their shoes, to realize a position that they didn't either hear before or understand in the same way. So we really are seeing other institutions look at the Welcome Project and are interested in creating their own Welcome Projects. We're presenting at conferences. We're using it in the community to talk with the high school, the YMCA, the Chamber of Commerce, to have conversations about, as demographically Valparaiso changes, what are we doing as a community to make sure that everyone feels like they belong?
And is that, in your professional opinion?
Right, I think that's exactly how you can sum it up. So the more people will become aware of things that's happening, the better off we are to make a more inclusive environment.
Right.
And so that's a goal within the next couple of years that I would be able to do.
And those seem relatively obtainable. I mean, they at least motioning and getting ourselves in a position where longer goals, more like extravagant things, can actually be tackled. It's unfortunate that there's only 30 minutes in this show, because I think that this could easily be something that we talk about more often. And I think this is something that the student body needs to hear. So Professor Powell, as well as Liz Wuerffel, thank you guys so much for joining us today on Crusader Conversation. Remember, you can catch all the latest VUTV programming right on our YouTube page, youtube.com/ValpoVUTV. For everyone here at VUTV, I'm your host, Ricky Cody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
You have to start rethinking and reevaluating how you are and what issues, hidden issues you have in terms of looking at and living with different people. And some people say, I am fine, I have a gay friend and I know somebody who is African American, and I know that's not the issue. That does not solve anything. The issues that you may have, you have to discover them. And once you are aware of them, then you will be able to, well, take a stand, act, and change them. And then you will be ready to do your part in terms of building a culture of equity and inclusion.
Hi everybody, I'm Dick Vitale of ESPN, and I'm on VUTV. It's awesome, baby, with a capital A.
Interested in the television industry? Stop by our office in Schnabel Hall and join VUTV today.